You ever have one of those nights where everything feels like it's crashing down, but in the middle of that chaos, someone you never expected ends up leaning on you? Yeah, that was last Friday for me. I was just minding my own business, finishing up some work emails in my tiny apartment when my phone buzzed like it was about to explode. It was Max, my best friend since college, texting me at 11 p.m., which already felt suspicious because Max is usually the let's keep it chill kind of guy. His message was short but blunt. Can I crash at yours? Need to talk. Normally, Max would call, maybe joke about being dramatic, but this was different. I knew something was seriously wrong. Max and I go way back, and while we're not the mushy types who spill all our feelings, we've had each other's backs through just about everything. So when he says need to talk, you don't just brush that off. I opened the door to find him standing there, looking half like he'd been crying, and half like he wanted to disappear completely. Max is the kind of guy who's always been confident, maybe even a little tooly, with this easy smile that lights up a room. But right now, all of that was gone. His eyes were red and tired, and the way he slumped against the doorframe told me everything. Something had broken inside him. Dumped, he said before I even offered him a seat. Just one word, but it hit like a punch. Max, the guy who dates casually, never really got too wrapped up in anything serious, had just been dumped. Not by some fling, but by someone he'd actually cared about. That was the twist I didn't see coming. I grabbed him a beer from the fridge and sat down across from him, trying to figure out where to start. It's weird, because I always thought Max was the one who'd be the shoulder to cry on, but here he was, vulnerable, and honestly it threw me off. We sat in that quiet, awkward silence for a while, both of us unsure what to say next. What happened? I finally asked, trying to keep my voice casual even though I wanted to know every messy detail. Max shrugged, looked away, then back at me with this half smile that didn't reach his eyes. It just ended. No big fight, no screaming. She said she wasn't happy anymore. Guess I wasn't enough. Hearing that was like stepping into a story I'd never imagined. I knew Max was good-looking, smart, funny. Hell, he could have had anyone. So why did this hurt so much? And more than that, why did I feel this sudden urge to be the one who helped him pick up the pieces? That night, sitting there with Max spilling the story no one else had heard, I realized something was shifting between us. Not in a loud, obvious way, just in the quiet moments where you realize maybe your best friend isn't just your best friend anymore. I didn't know then how everything was about to change, or how much this night would rewrite the script of our friendship. But looking at Max, broken and real in front of me, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let him face this alone. I reached out and clapped him on the shoulder, something I rarely did because, well, Max and I weren't really the touchy-feely type. But that night felt different, like the usual walls and jokes weren't gonna cut it. Heck man, you're definitely enough, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth the breath. Max grunted, like he was trying to absorb what I said but struggling. Then he looked down at the beer in his hands like it was a lifeline. That's when I noticed he was shaking just a little. Not the kind of shake you get from drinking too fast, but the kind that comes with raw hurt. We ended up sitting on my couch in silence for a while. I wasn't sure if he wanted to talk more or just sit there and drown in his own thoughts. Honestly, I felt awkward as hell. Normally, I'm the one who cracks jokes or changes the subject, but this time there was nothing funny to say. So I just let the quiet hang between us. After what felt like forever, Max finally broke the silence. I don't get it, you know. We were good. Or at least, I thought we were. She said she needed space, but it's been like a month of space before she just stopped texting back. He ran his hands through his hair, frustration flickering in his eyes. I guess I was just fooling myself. That hit harder than I expected. I mean, sure, relationships end all the time, but hearing someone you care about say they felt so blindsided kind of pricked at this part of me I didn't know was tender. I wanted to say something that would fix it, but what do you say when someone you're supposed to have figured out is breaking right in front of you? So I just told him the truth. Maybe she didn't know how to say goodbye the right way. Maybe it wasn't you, but her own messed up way of handling things. Max looked at me like I'd just handed him a puzzle piece he didn't want but needed. "Thanks," he said quietly. "I don't know what I'd do if you weren't here." For a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. And honestly, I wish things were simpler because the way I was feeling was anything but that. The hours passed and Max started opening up more about the little moments he missed, the things they said that didn't seem important at the time, the weird hollow feeling of walking into places they used to go together. Through it all, I just listened, trying to be the friend he needed. At one point, he asked me, almost out of nowhere, "Have you ever been dumped?" I laughed, partly to hide how much the question threw me off. "Yeah, a couple of times. Not fun. But hey, no one's perfect, right? If it's any consolation, you're way better off with someone who can't appreciate you." He smiled a little, and I saw that familiar spark return, just a flicker. It felt like a small victory. By the time Max finally looked at his watch and started gathering himself to leave, the mood had shifted. It wasn't all doom and gloom anymore. There was this weird sense of calm between us, like surviving the storm together. "Thanks for letting me crash," he said as he stood up, running a hand through his hair again, this time less stressed, more like a guy who had just cleared some mental fog. "No problem," I said, and then, on a whim, I added, "You know, if you ever want to get out of your head, I'm around. Drinks, movies, whatever." He nodded, eyes locking with mine for just a second longer than usual. "I might take you up on that." After he left, I sat there for a while, the room suddenly feeling quieter than before. And that was when it hit me. This wasn't just about Max getting over a breakup anymore. It was about us. About what had been simmering beneath the surface for years and suddenly felt impossible to ignore. I don't know exactly when things started to change between us, but that night was definitely the beginning. Something about seeing Max so vulnerable made me realize I cared for him in a way I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. The next morning, I woke up with that feeling, a mix of excitement and nervousness that something big was about to happen. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Max go through the next chapter of his life alone. Not anymore. I spent most of Saturday pacing around my apartment, trying to act like I had everything under control, but honestly, I was a mess. The whole night with Max kept replaying in my head. The way he looked when he showed up, like the weight of the world was resting on his shoulders. And that glance he gave me when he said he might take me up on hanging out. It wasn't just a casual thing. At least, I didn't think it was. So when my phone buzzed Saturday afternoon, I didn't even hesitate. It was Max. Simple message. "You up for that drink tonight?" My heart did this weird flip-flop, but I played it cool. "Yeah, name the place. I'll be there." We met at this little dive bar not far from my place. Nothing fancy, just the kind of place where you can drown your sorrows in cheap beer and not worry about who's watching. Max was already there when I got there, nursing a pint, looking a little more like himself but still carrying that shadow from Friday night. I slid into the booth across from him, and he looked up, gave me that half smile again, the one that cracks the surface enough to let you see the real him underneath. "Thanks for coming out," he said quietly. "No problem. Figured you needed a break from the pity party," I joked, trying to lighten the mood. He chuckled, and for a moment, it felt like old times. We talked about everything and nothing. Work, ridiculous coworkers, the latest dumb thing I did on a dating app. But there was this undercurrent between us I couldn't ignore. Every once in a while, our eyes would meet, and it felt charged, like we were both trying to figure out if the other had noticed it too. At some point, Max leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I don't want to be that guy who's just the sad friend," he said, voice low. "But it's hard not to feel like I'm stuck in this loop, like I'm waiting for something to change, or for someone to save me." I looked at him, and suddenly all the jokes and distractions felt useless. "I'm not here to save you, Max, but I am here. For whatever you need." He nodded, eyes searching mine like he was trying to read a secret message there. "That means more than you know." The night stretched on, and the more we talked, the more I realized how much I wanted to be the one who helped him find that change he was hoping for. I didn't say anything then, but inside, I was buzzing with this strange mix of hope and fear. Later, as we walked out into the cool night air, Max stopped and looked at me. You ever think about, I don't know, us? I blinked, caught off guard. Us? Like, what do you mean? He shrugged, a little embarrassed. I don't know. I guess I'm saying maybe there's more here than just friendship, and maybe I'm tired of pretending like I haven't noticed. I swallowed hard, heart racing, because the truth was, I'd noticed. For years, actually. But I'd buried it, convinced it was easier to just be the guy in the background. Honestly? Yeah, I've thought about it, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Max smiled, that genuine, warm smile that made me want to stop time. Good, because I'm tired of holding it in. We stood there for a moment, the city lights flickering around us, and then, almost without thinking, I reached out and took his hand. It felt natural, like the missing piece sliding into place. Maybe this is the start of something new, I said softly. Max squeezed my hand, and I knew right then that nothing was going to be the same again. And honestly, I was okay with that. Because sometimes the best friendships are the ones that turn into something more messy, complicated, and completely worth it. After we slipped hands together on that quiet street under the flickering city lights, the world felt softer. Like everything that had been tense or awkward between us just melted away. We didn't say much more before heading back toward the subway station, mostly because neither of us knew what to say next, and the silence felt comfortable. Not in the way silence usually does when you're trying to avoid something, but like we were both just soaking in the moment. The ride home was weirdly peaceful. Max was leaning his head against the window, eyes half closed, and I found myself sneaking glances at him, wondering how I'd never noticed just how vulnerable he looked until now. It felt like I was seeing him in a way I hadn't before, not just my best friend, but someone I actually wanted to be close to, in every sense. When we got off at my stop, I paused before opening the door to my apartment. Something inside me was buzzing with a question I wasn't sure I was ready to ask, but couldn't hold back. So, what happens now? I asked, awkwardly running a hand through my hair. Max shrugged, that same half smile playing on his lips. I don't know. Maybe we figure it out together. Yeah, I said, heart pounding. Together sounds good. We stepped inside, and for the first time, the space that had always felt like just mine suddenly felt like it could be ours. Or at least, maybe that was the start. The next few days were a blur of texts, phone calls, and late-night video chats. We weren't rushing anything. No declarations, no grand gestures, just a slow, steady dance of discovery. Every conversation peeled back a little more of the walls we'd built around ourselves. Max told me about his ex in more detail, the things he'd kept bottled up, and I shared my own messiness, the times I'd hidden behind jokes and distractions. One afternoon, I invited Max over for dinner. Nothing fancy, just me fumbling through making pasta and us laughing over my terrible attempts at cooking. Afterward, we ended up sprawled on the couch, sharing a bottle of wine, and it felt like the kind of night I'd always hoped for, but never dared to expect. At some point, Max leaned in close and whispered, "You make everything feel less scary." I smiled, my heart catching in my throat. You do the same for me. That night was the first time we kissed. Soft and tentative, like we were both afraid to break what we'd just started building. But it was real, and that made it all the more electric. The way his lips felt against mine was like a promise, maybe for something new, something better than what either of us had before. But with that promise came this gnawing fear. What if it all went wrong? What if the friendship that had meant so much was the only thing we'd end up with? I wrestled with these doubts quietly, not wanting to scare Max or ruin the fragile new thing between us. A few days later, during one of our talks that stretched into the early morning, Max said something that surprised me. I've been thinking a lot about us, about how I never thought I'd want this. I always figured I'd just stick to what I knew. Friends, casual flings, nothing serious. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Yeah, me too. But now, he continued, voice barely above a whisper, now I can't imagine wanting anything else. I felt this tightness in my chest, this mix of joy and terror. Me neither. The next few weeks were full of small moments that made me fall harder for Max. The way he'd laugh at my terrible jokes, The way he'd brush his fingers against mine when he thought I wasn't looking, the way he'd hold my hand in crowded places like he was staking a claim. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments of awkwardness, of uncertainty. Like when we met up with our usual group of friends and I caught Max glancing at me with that shy, nervous smile. Or when I hesitated before introducing him as my boyfriend for the first time. It felt like stepping off a cliff without a parachute. One night, after a particularly clumsy argument about something silly, where we both said things we didn't mean, we sat on my balcony, the city lights twinkling below, trying to catch our breath. Max reached out and took my hand again, his voice soft but steady. "We're not perfect," he said, "but maybe perfect isn't what we need." I squeezed his hand back, feeling a wave of warmth spread through me. "Yeah, I want us. Messy, complicated, real." He smiled, and that was all the reassurance I needed. Looking back now, I realized that night with Max was the start of something I never expected, but always secretly hoped for. It wasn't just the end of his heartbreak. It was the beginning of ours. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. The weeks that followed felt like we were navigating this strange new world with no map or instructions. Every day with Max was a mix of excitement and uncertainty, like walking a tightrope over an abyss of what-ifs. But honestly, even when it was scary, it felt good. It felt real. We settled into a rhythm that was equal parts comforting and exhilarating. Mornings filled with lazy coffee runs, afternoons spent wandering bookstores or random city streets, and evenings where we'd crash on my couch, binge-watching terrible reality shows, because neither of us could agree on anything better. Little things, like Max stealing the covers or me catching him humming when he thought no one was listening, started to stitch themselves into the fabric of our days. One rainy Saturday, we found ourselves at a tiny hole-in-the-wall cafe in this part of the city neither of us had been to before. The place was cozy, with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh espresso hanging in the air. Max looked around, eyes brightening. "This is the kind of place I could disappear into," he said with a grin. I laughed, because that sounded exactly like him, always chasing the quiet corners away from the chaos. We ordered a couple of lattes and settled into a booth by the window. The rain tapped softly against the glass as we talked about everything and nothing. At some point, the conversation turned to the ex, the one who had left Max standing on my doorstep that night. "I don't hate her," Max said carefully, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. "It's more complicated than that. I want to be okay with it, you know? But some days it feels like this weight I can't shake." I nodded, wanting to say something helpful, but knowing nothing I said would fix that overnight. "It's okay to feel that way. Healing isn't a straight line." He looked at me, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "Thanks for being patient with me. More than anyone else has been." That hit me harder than I expected, because while I wanted to be patient, what I really wanted was for him to feel better. For us to feel better. For the kind of future I was starting to imagine when I looked at him. The kind I'd never dared admit out loud. As the afternoon stretched on, our hands found each other on the table, fingers intertwining naturally. It felt like a silent promise, a way of saying "I'm here" without words. But even as things grew closer, there was this underlying tension I couldn't shake. The fear of what would happen if we crossed a line we couldn't come back from. Would our friendship survive? Would we survive? One night, a few weeks after that cafe visit, Max showed up at my door, looking restless. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice low. We sat on my bed, the city lights casting soft shadows across the room. Max took a deep breath, then said, "I'm scared. Scared that if this doesn't work out, we lose what we had, and I don't know if I could handle that." I felt my own chest tighten. "Me too," I admitted. "But maybe it's worth the risk." He looked at me, searching, and I reached out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind his ear. "We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just figure it out one day at a time." Slowly, he leaned into me, resting his forehead against mine. One day at a time. We stayed like that for a while, just holding on to each other in the quiet darkness. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And sometimes, that's all you need. A few days later, Max surprised me with tickets to a local jazz club. "Thought we could celebrate surviving the first month," he said with a shy smile. The night was magic. Dim lights, soulful music, and the way Max's hand fit perfectly in mine, made me feel like I was exactly where I was meant to be. After the last song, as we walked back through the empty streets, he stopped and pulled me close. "Thank you," he whispered, "for being more than just my best friend, for being you." I smiled, heart pounding. "Thank you for trusting me." And in that moment, under the glow of street lamps and the quiet hum of the city, I realized that sometimes the best kind of love sneaks up on you when you least expect it, when your best friend gets dumped and then comes to you, ready to start something new, something real, something worth fighting for. After that night at the jazz club, something between Max and me shifted in ways I hadn't quite expected. It wasn't just the easy smiles or the hand-holding anymore. It was the little things that started to pile up, reshaping the way I saw him and, honestly, the way I saw myself. Like the next morning, when Max showed up at my place with 2 coffees and that trademark grin that could light up a cave. "Figured you'd need this," he said, handing me the cup like it was a lifeline. For a second, I just stared at him, feeling this unfamiliar warmth curdle in my chest. "You're really good at this," I said, meaning the whole thing. Us, the way he made me feel. He shrugged, cheeks pink. "Guess I'm trying." "Don't want to screw this up," I chuckled, then caught myself. "Screw this up?" For the first time, I realized we were walking a tightrope between friendship and something else, and the stakes felt higher than I'd admitted. That day, as we sat on my couch with a lazy playlist humming in the background, Max suddenly looked serious. "Hey, can I ask you something? And be honest?" "Of course. Did you ever think about me like this before? Like, not just as a friend?" I swallowed hard. Here it was, the question I'd been dodging in my own head for months. "Yeah," I admitted. "For a long time, actually. I just figured you didn't feel the same, so I kept it to myself." Max's eyes softened, and he reached for my hand again. I thought I was the only one. We stayed quiet for a minute, just letting the truth settle between us. A few days later, we decided to take things slow but intentional. No rushing, but with every text, every late-night call, every shared meal, we built a connection that felt solid and unpredictable all at once. One night, Max invited me over to his place. He cooked dinner. A disaster, as usual, but his enthusiasm made up for the burnt edges. We ate on the floor, laughing about how neither of us knew what we were doing, and I realized how much I liked being there with him, in his world. After dinner, we sprawled on his bed, and Max looked over at me with that quiet intensity that made my heart stutter. "I'm scared," he said, "of losing you, of messing this up." "Me too," I said honestly, "but I think it's worth the risk." He smiled, reaching out to brush my cheek. "You make it easier." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of firsts. Our first official date night, the first time I met his family, the first time he met mine. Each step was nerve-wracking, but also filled with this kind of joy I hadn't known was possible. But with the good came the challenges. Navigating the transition from best friends to something more wasn't always smooth. There were moments of jealousy, misunderstandings, and insecurity. Like the time Max's ex showed up unexpectedly at a party we were both at, and I caught him staring after she left, a flicker of something I didn't want to name crossing his face. That night, we had a long talk, maybe the hardest one yet. Max confessed he was still sorting through his feelings, and I admitted I was scared of losing not just him but the friendship that had been the foundation of everything. We didn't have any answers, just promises to be patient and honest. And somehow, after that, things felt stronger. More real. One afternoon, we found ourselves sitting by the river, the city skyline glittering behind us. Max leaned into me, his head resting on my shoulder. "I'm glad you were there that night when I needed someone," he said softly. "I'm glad you came to me," I replied. And in that moment, looking out at the water, I understood that sometimes love sneaks in through the cracks of heartbreak, not as some grand gesture, but as a quiet, steady presence. Max wasn't just my best friend anymore. He was the person I wanted to build something with. Messy and complicated and perfectly imperfect. I don't know what the future holds, but right now, with him beside me, I'm willing to find out. Together. There's something about the way Max fits into my life now that feels both familiar and brand new. Like finding a favorite song you've known for years, but suddenly hearing it in a way that makes you appreciate every note differently. We've had our share of bumps and doubts, sure, nothing worth a rom-com script, but enough to remind us we're human, and that's okay. One evening, a few months after we officially started calling it us, Max and I found ourselves sitting on my fire escape, wrapped in blankets against the cool spring breeze. The city hummed softly below, and the sky was just dark enough to make the stars feel close. We didn't need to fill the silence with words. The quiet was comfortable, like a shared secret. After a while, Max reached over and took my hand. His fingers curled around mine like they were meant to be there. I looked over and caught the soft smile he was trying to hide, the kind that reaches his eyes first. You know, he said, voice low and steady. I was scared at first. Scared of losing you. Scared of messing all this up. I squeezed his hand gently. Me too. But I think the scariest things are the ones worth doing. He laughed softly, leaning his head on my shoulder. Yeah, the best ones too. In that simple moment, it hit me how much we'd grown. How something that started as heartbreak and confusion had blossomed into this quiet, steady kind of love. Not flashy or perfect, but real, rooted in years of friendship and the willingness to keep trying. We didn't need grand declarations or dramatic gestures. Just the understanding that we'd chosen each other, flaws and all. That no matter what came next, we weren't alone anymore. And honestly, that felt like enough. More than enough.